Well, here we are at the Naked Architect series, and this is our third series. And today we are very grateful that Alison has invited us into her home today, and also to Tom McKenzie, who is the architect for Alison's home. And today we're going to talk about the ideal client and how you can actually get the most out of working with an architect. So maybe the first thing to start off with is maybe tell us a bit about how you found each other, how you met, and maybe how you decided that it was the right fit for you.
Well, I had decided that I wanted to extend the house. This is now about 2 years ago, but really didn't have any experience in going around finding an architect. I had no colleagues to ask, so I phoned a few of the larger architectural companies,
yes.
Who really, this was too small a scale project for them to do. But through that process, I got advised about a website called New Architects Melbourne, and that's a website with, I think, emerging kind of young architects,
yes.
each of whom had some presence on the site, and then you could go behind the scenes. And Tom's was the profile that caught my attention first. It was a simple picture of a wooden join that was just perfectly executed,
yes.
and it just kind of told me about the values of that architect. And then through that I made contact with Tom, who came out to the house and was very open about ideas that he could envisage that would fulfill what I wished for. I had a kind of broad sweep approach of what I wanted. I would say no more than that. And he was very good about filling in details and just kind of making me think slightly more about the brief and exactly what I wanted in order to take the project forward.
Yeah. And so from your end then, Tom, in terms of receiving that first phone call from a client, like the I guess what sort of how can you tell whether it's actually a project that you're able to take on?
Generally, you can work it out quite quickly in that first phone call and get a sense of what people's approach to the project is. We often ask what their aspirations for the project are, what they're trying to achieve,
their budget.
We ask what their budget is, and try to get a sense of all those things aligning from the outset as much as possible. And if all that sounds feasible, then we ask to come around and have a look and meet each other to make sure we also get along, and that the relationship can sort of start from there.
And so when you at that first meeting, I guess it's a really important point where I guess you have to gauge whether or not you're on the same page in terms of sensibility. Was that something that came to you very quickly, or did it take some time to sort of work out whether that relationship and your values aligned?
I think from my perspective, it was very clear from the beginning that our values were very similar. We wanted a good quality build that was going to last. I had a very clear idea that I wanted a living space that got a lot of light and a place I can work with light. I have dogs as well, so it needed to be a kind of dog-friendly house.
The other clients.
Other clients. And therefore, from my perspective, I never contacted another architect after that first meeting because it was very clear.
It sort of felt right?
It felt right.
Yeah. And what about you, Tom, when you first came here?
Yep, I'd agree. It was the Alison's, what she described as her initial brief, and the initial ideas that she had were very consistent with what I thought would be a good approach to renovating this house. And we spoke about a few broad ideas as to how we might approach that, by extending the house out into the garden, replacing what was an existing garage to get north light and really open the house up to the garden. And so the key aspects of the brief, it was possible to see that, one, they were good ideas for the site and that Alison sort of had thought about it, and that if we were to follow through on that, it would eventually lead to a good project.
And so I guess following that up, what sort of information is actually the most useful thing to receive sort of early on in order to kickstart the process? I guess from your end, and also Alison, what information do you need from the architect to help you sort of get started in that process as well?
I think the first conversations we've had were really the process itself, which I had no knowledge of. So,
so you hadn't used an architect before?
Never renovated or used an architect before. So it was kind of what his role in this was. I was unsure about how much detail I was meant to come up with.
Yes.
And really that negotiating things like how the length of time was what I was hoping to build within the budget that I had. Was that a kind of foreseeable or realistic option, without having to decrease the quality of the build in order to access it. So it was those kind of very general, broad sweep to give me an idea about planning the next few years.
Yes. Yeah. And so what information do you need, Tom?
I think it's different for each project and depends on how much of a clear idea potential clients have of what they're hoping to achieve. Some people are very detail oriented and provide things like lists of things that they feel need to be addressed in the project. And then other clients who may not have a design background or much experience of dealing with design or an architect.
Which we've got to say is actually most residential clients. It's often the first contact.
I think it's beneficial to speak in broader terms about what the aspirations of the project are, and then in a way the architect can bring their expertise and design skill to interpreting that brief and what might work for the particular site or client, and then the architect would then sort of present that brief back to the client and say, based on our conversations, we think this is what you're after. Or somewhere in between, which I guess is probably what in Alison's case, there was the bigger ideas of extending the house out into the garden, and then there were a few pragmatic requirements which needed to be addressed, and then throughout the process of the project, they became more. We sort of filled out the detail throughout the process as we got further down the track.
And so with that initial brief then of what you initially asked for, Alison, did what Tom come back with in terms of a proposal seem very different, or what you expected, or
I would have said that in terms of the big brief, it fully fitted the brief, but it took it to a level that I wouldn't have come up to myself. I mean, it took it to a level whereby the home opened into the garden on two of the sides, which
is
something
looking out
that I never would have come across. So it was beautiful taking the kind of what I had was a kernel of an idea, and then really letting it flourish into a mature vision which I wouldn't have had. It was a joy, actually.
And on your end, Tom, then I guess in terms of what people expect you to come back with, that sort of seems to suggest there's a fair bit of room. Like, it's good to have a bit of room in terms of expectations of fulfilling their brief.
Yeah, I think so. I think the brief can be quite specific, but you can be open-minded to how that brief is achieved through a renovation or a design. And I think that was the case. What's always good for us is when we present a project to a client for the first time and that they say it was something that they would never have thought of, but it does satisfy their brief. And I think that's a good outcome because it means they're benefiting from the expertise that an architect can bring to a project.
So these are the happy things, but were there things that maybe you disagreed on or I guess difficulties, and how did you actually overcome them in terms of negotiation, discussion?
I have to be upfront and say that I honestly can't think of a time that we disagreed. We had issues that I wanted, but I think we both communicated quite openly about that, particularly to do with my dogs. I'd wanted to live in the house for a large majority of the time, and therefore there was a negotiation between myself, Tom, and this builder Steve from Herringbone about how much the time at the beginning of the build I'd have to spend out. And that was a very good compromise. So I felt that in all the conversations we had, I felt that I was listened to. That what I wanted was acknowledged, but often did require a compromise on both sides. And I felt through that you can compromise if you feel you're being heard.
Yes. Yeah.
And not just being asked to fit into somebody else's concept of how they think the build should work.
Yeah.
I think the approach we take is try to avoid things getting to the stage where a disagreement would eventuate. Where by being quite upfront and talking about what's going to happen next in the process. And ideally...
So you can kind of time your decision making.
That's right. And ideally providing the client, and in this case Alison, with as much information as they need to be able to make a good decision and working through that together with all the parties involved. Renovations can be quite tricky to go through the whole process, and things can come up that are unexpected.
Yes.
And if everyone has a good way of communicating and trying to predict what's going to happen next and working out where everyone stands in relation to that occurrence, for example, because we're working with an existing house.
There's always a few surprises.
There's always a few surprises. And so we suggested from some of the very first meetings that there be a contingency sum to allow to cover any of those unexpected things. And so from very early on, that was already taken care of. So when things did eventuate with the existing house that needed that weren't expected, and in your case, relatively minor things. That
so it's just a bit of restumping and
reframing of the existing roof. That there was some money put aside to deal with them, and then the process could continue to move on and not sort of become a bigger issue.
Not at any point did I have to go back and reconsider my budget and whether I could afford to do this in the budget, because I think that contingency is money because it's part of the budget. You've mentally already wiped off other aspects of your life. So it was never an issue, and therefore it gave a sense of security about that. And whenever a variation was discussed, I could always double check with Tom whether he felt that the builder's quote was reasonable, and it always was.
Although it's probably a good lead on to like the amount of communication that you actually need in order to, really get a lot out of the process. Like, how often did you meet, and did that vary from stage to stage? And how you communicated? Was it always meetings or?
I think we met initially to describe the brief, and then we kind of communicated a bit through email. Then there was the point where the build actually started, and at which point myself, Tom and Steve the builder would meet on site on a regular kind of weekly basis just before work. Really, I think partly because we were still at the deconstruction point at that point and you were never really quite sure what we were going to find. And then those kind of varied in length depending on whether there was a critical question that needed to be addressed. Most of the time, if there was an issue that Tom wanted my agreement to or my thoughts on, he would contact me by email, but I never felt rushed. I never felt I had to make a decision in 24 hours but I was always very conscious about the fact that things needed to continue smoothly. So if ever I contacted Tom, and I always valued the fact he got back to me the same day. So I was never hanging around.
And so I guess one of the things that might help other people undertaking this process would be to understand like what the qualities of an ideal client might be according to you in terms of the the information, but also the response, and like how to actually get the most out of working with you, Tom.
I think clients who are quite upfront and honest about what they're thinking about and about the budget, and that if they're uncertain about something, that they feel very comfortable asking questions, and that helps everyone sort of know where everyone stands, and also allows us as architects to provide the information that the client needs to be able to make the right decision for the project. And clients who feel very comfortable asking questions, it sort of leads to a much better process and less surprises coming up later. And I think also Alison was very clear on things that were sort of not negotiable, or things that certainly had to remain in the project, and or things that she certainly wanted realised, which is a really good thing to be clear about. And then at the same time, open-minded about other ideas that we would bring to the table so Alison could go away and consider them, have a think about them, because obviously they're new ideas which clients may not have thought about
to you initially.
And so affording them the time to be able to think about those sort of things. And likewise, when things came up on the build, having sort of a clear dialogue where...
you'd prioritise things.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of combination of being quite specific about some things and open-minded about others is sort of makes a good dynamic for the type of build of a renovation where there might be things which are unexpected, but then there's also things through using architects or professional expertise you can manage, and that they should very much be expected to be delivered.
Yeah. And from your end, Alison, like what sort of qualities from your architect did you feel actually really helped you sort of in the process?
I think an architect who considered my finances as important. So in other words, ensured that we kept going back to make sure that it wasn't going over budget, and who didn't try and extend the work to a degree, even though it might have fitted in with his bigger vision. So I think I appreciated that.
And also changes during construction, I think.
That's
you sort of mentioned, and
you
get excited about it, things being done.
You get carried away at a certain point. And there were some variations that I actively asked for, which were amenable. So the architect was able to say, yes, we can do that. And yes, it's not going to take you outside your budget too much. I think somebody, ultimately, it comes down to trust, somebody who's trusting, who's got a vision, so that you give the minimum of what you expect, and they then grow that into this bigger vision. Because after all, you're spending money employing a professional, so you should really be taking advantage of the professional skills. And
well, I guess as a final question, maybe, would you do it again?
If I had the money, certainly. Certainly I would do it again.
And was the process what you expected?
The process was actually, I have to say, enlightening and enjoyable. I learned a lot about colour and about design and about the way to think of architecture, and which has now changed the way I view buildings I work in and other friends' houses.
That's great. Well, that's a great advocacy project.
It's tense, it is your money, it is your house, there's always going to be an underlying tension with it, but I really cannot add any disaster stories to this at all. It was a good build.
This is just like bad for grand designs.
I feel a bit Pollyanna-ish, it's honestly not me. But I have to say that my vision's been transformed into a house I never thought I would ever own.
Fantastic. Well, I think that might be a good opportunity to wrap up. Thank you so much, Alison.
Pleasure.
For sharing your home with us. I mean, it's a rare opportunity to be able to see private houses, because obviously they're, people's personal space. So to invite us into your home, but also into the process that you actually shared together to make the house is fantastic. Thanks very much. And thank you very much, Tom, for bearing a little bit more about what is the process of working with clients. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.